The parking lot was nearly empty that night. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly blue glow across the slick pavement. The rain had stopped an hour ago, but puddles still reflected the giant glowing sign, Walmart. Somewhere in the distance, a shopping cart rolled on its own, its metal wheels squealing against the asphalt, echoing far louder than it should have. It was close to midnight, one of those hours when reality seemed to loosen its grip, when the world fell silent enough that every small sound carried weight. Inside the store, the air was cold and stale, humming with the low drone of refrigeration units. The aisles stood motionless, filled with neatly arranged rows of products that looked almost too perfect, too lifeless, like props waiting for an audience that would never return. At the far end of the grocery section, beneath a flickering fluorescent tube, a single employee moved in silence, scanning the floor for debris. His name tag had long since faded, the edges of his blue vest worn from years of repetition. He did not notice the shadow that lingered at the end of the aisle, or perhaps he had stopped noticing it altogether. Customers rarely came in this late. The few who did usually kept to themselves, shuffling quietly through the aisles with blank, tired faces. Yet something about this night felt different. The cameras above aisle 5 glitched for 6 seconds. Static, distortion, and then nothing but black. When the feed returned, the employee was gone. His cart remained, still filled with cleaning supplies, perfectly still in the center of the aisle. By morning, his car was still in the parking lot. His phone, wallet, and keys sat on the break room table. Management called the police, and soon yellow tape wrapped around the front entrance like a warning no one would understand. Shoppers gathered outside whispering theories. Abduction, mental breakdown, some even muttering about something darker, something no one wanted to name out loud. The store reopened within 48 hours. It always did. There were statements, investigations, apologies. Cameras were replaced, security patrols increased, but the night shift workers noticed something the press did not mention. Sometimes, around 2:13 a.m., the intercom system turned on by itself. The voice that came through was faint, muffled, and distorted by static, but it spoke in a tone every employee recognized. It was his voice, the one who had vanished. There were reports of lights flickering in patterns, 3 long flashes, 2 short, 1 long again. The same rhythm repeated every few nights, as if the building itself had learned to breathe. A janitor swore he saw movement down the frozen foods aisle, a shadow that stretched and curled as if alive. But when he looked directly at it, there was only the hum of the refrigerators. Most people laughed off the rumors. It was just another Walmart, they said, the kind that stayed open too late and collected stories like dust. Yet as weeks passed, small things began to go missing. Boxes of cereal found stacked in strange shapes, aisles rearranged overnight, toys turned to face the wrong direction. It seemed harmless at first, pranks, mistakes, coincidences, but then customers started reporting something else. They said they could feel someone behind them, breathing softly, close enough to stir the air on the back of their necks. One woman claimed she turned around and saw no one, but the faint outline of a handprint appeared on the fogged glass of the freezer door beside her. Another man said he heard footsteps following him from aisle to aisle, always stopping when he stopped, always one step behind. Security footage later showed him walking quickly toward the exit, glancing behind him every few seconds. He stumbled once, turned sharply, and froze. The video glitched at that exact moment, 4 seconds of static, and when the image returned, the man was gone. The automatic doors opened, then closed, but no one came through. The police reviewed the footage dozens of times, slowing it down frame by frame. Nothing. No sign of entry or exit. No sign of tampering. The timestamp simply jumped. Night workers began quitting without notice. The ones who stayed avoided certain areas, especially after midnight. The toy section was one of them. Employees whispered about hearing faint laughter when no one else was there, the kind of laughter that did not sound childlike or human. They claimed the motion-activated lights flicked on by themselves in empty aisles, revealing brief glimpses of movement between shelves. A manager tried to dismiss the stories during a staff meeting, calling them imagination born from exhaustion. Yet that same night, his office door was found open at 3 a.m., his computer screen glowing white. On the screen, a single line of text had been typed over and over again. "We never left." No one admitted typing it. The keyboard was untouched and no fingerprints were found. The store's maintenance crew began to notice odd fluctuations in the building's temperature. Cold spots appeared in random aisles, sudden drops of 10 to 15 degrees that vanished as quickly as they came. Some workers started bringing small crosses or trinkets for protection. Others refused to speak about what they saw, as if naming it gave it power. Locals began calling it the Midnight Store, a place where time folded strangely, where reflections in the security mirrors sometimes lagged a second behind. The more people ignored it, the stronger the feeling grew, that the store was watching, that something ancient had found a home beneath its fluorescent lights. And perhaps it was not the first. Walmart had been built on old land that once belonged to a railway depot, long demolished after a fire no one could explain. The foundation beneath the store carried old marks, old memories, and maybe something else entirely. Every town has its legends. But this one feels different, because it is not a story told by strangers. It is whispered by the people who still work there, the ones who hear the static hum of the intercom in the dead of night and know something is speaking back. When the lights flicker, they say, "Do not look up. Do not move. Do not breathe," because sometimes the store breathes back. Long before the glowing signs and the endless rows of merchandise, the land where that Walmart stood was nothing but a quiet field, hidden behind a stretch of dying oak trees. The locals called it Miller's Hollow, a name that still showed up in old county records even though no one remembered who Miller was. Back then, before the store was built, the land was a forgotten patch of earth, damp and uneven, where children were warned not to play after dark. It had been part of the old railway system, a depot that burned down in 1962 under circumstances no one could quite explain. The fire started in the middle of the night, spreading faster than wood should burn, leaving behind a blackened pit that refused to grow grass for decades. When the developers came to build the Walmart in the early 2000s, they ignored the local stories. They saw only opportunity, a perfect space between highways, cheap land, and endless consumer traffic. The construction crews worked fast, clearing the oaks, paving over the scorched earth, pouring fresh concrete over the remains of the depot. No one questioned why the soil underneath steamed even on cold mornings, or why tools went missing overnight. The first few years after opening were ordinary. The store flourished, employees came and went, and the town began to orbit around it like moths to a light. Walmart became the heartbeat of the community, open 24 hours, always awake, always watching. The late-night crowd was its own strange family. Truckers, insomniacs, teenagers searching for something to do, and lonely workers clinging to the hum of fluorescent light because the silence of home was worse. Among them was one man. Quiet, reserved, a night cleaner who had worked there since the grand opening. He never called in sick, never spoke much beyond polite greetings, and always stayed late after his shift ended, walking the aisles alone with a small radio clipped to his belt. Co-workers said he was reliable, maybe too reliable. He lived alone, kept to himself, and never missed a paycheck. Yet those who worked beside him often said that sometimes he seemed to be listening to something they could not hear. He once told a cashier, half-jokingly, that he heard whispers through the intercom even when it was turned off. Static, then a voice. A woman's voice, he said. But he laughed it off and went back to mopping the floors as if it was nothing. Over the years, strange incidents began piling up. Too small to make headlines, but too many to ignore. A night stalker disappeared during a thunderstorm, only to be found sitting in the employee break room hours later, trembling and unable to explain where he had been. Another worker quit abruptly after claiming to see a reflection in the glass cooler that did not match his movements. Still, the store carried on. Corporate policy demanded that everything appear normal. Cameras were installed in new corners, motion sensors added, lights upgraded. Yet with every attempt to control the atmosphere, it seemed to fight back. There were reports of electrical malfunctions that maintenance could not trace. The lights over aisle 12 would flicker in rhythm with the store's background music, matching each beat precisely until the song ended. The sound system itself once played a song that no one recognized, an old tune, grainy and distorted, with lyrics too faint to understand. When management reviewed the playlist history, the song was not there. Then came the night of the disappearance, the janitor who vanished mid-shift, leaving behind his cart and his vest. The same man who used to talk about whispers in the intercom. That incident was the first time the town began to look at the Walmart differently. It no longer felt like a place of convenience. It felt heavy, haunted by something that did not want to be seen. Local newspapers ran short articles about the missing worker, calling it an ongoing investigation, but within days, the story was buried. Walmart did not close. Business continued. Shoppers returned, drawn by habit, pretending not to notice the new security presence at the doors. Yet for those who lived nearby, the change was clear. The parking lot lights began flickering at odd hours, sometimes turning off entirely for a few seconds before blinding the asphalt again. People walking home from late shifts swore they heard the faint sound of footsteps behind them, even when they were alone. Some said they saw figures in the glass doors before opening, reflections that stayed a second too long. One woman who worked in the bakery section said she could not bake alone anymore. She claimed the ovens turned on by themselves, heating to exact temperatures without any input. When she asked for the system logs, they were blank. The next morning, she found her apron folded neatly on her workstation with a note that read, "You are not alone." The handwriting was hers, though she did not remember writing it. Rumors spread quietly among employees. Some said the store had been built over unmarked graves left behind from the depot fire. Others whispered about an old employee who had died years before, whose name was still listed in the payroll system for reasons no one could explain. The company denied everything, of course. Corporate statements were cold and precise. "We are committed to the safety and well-being of our staff and customers." But behind those words, behind the glowing blue logo that shone through the night, something else stirred, something patient. Residents who lived near the parking lot started complaining about strange noises late at night. The echo of shopping carts moving on their own, the faint sound of voices carried by the wind. One man who worked at the gas station across the street said he often saw lights turn on and off in patterns, like Morse code. He started writing them down, but before he could finish, his notebook was stolen from his car. He found it a week later, placed carefully at the entrance of the Walmart, soaked in rainwater with every page torn out. The store was no longer just a store. It had become part of the town's identity, something unexplainable that everyone tolerated but no one confronted. Parents told their children not to go there after midnight. Truckers refused to park overnight. Even the police patrols shortened their routes, choosing to circle the lot from a distance rather than enter it. In a town that once relied on Walmart for everything, people began to speak of it in lowered voices as if saying too much could draw attention, yet the automatic doors kept sliding open, welcoming new faces, unaware of the history buried beneath their feet. And every night, when the last customer left and the intercom buzzed softly with static, the store returned to its truest form, a hollow, breathing place that had learned how to listen. It began with the simplest things: lights flickering at the edges of the camera's vision, soft noises that the human mind could easily dismiss as mechanical hums. Yet those who worked the graveyard shift at the Walmart started noticing that the disturbances followed a rhythm, as if something unseen moved with purpose. The automatic doors would slide open at 2 a.m. precisely, even when the parking lot was empty. The air would change, heavier, colder, carrying the faint smell of damp wood and smoke. Some said it reminded them of burnt pine, the scent that used to drift from the old depot after it, burned down decades ago. The first to truly sensed something wrong was a cashier named Lena. She often volunteered for the late shifts because she liked the quiet, the way the aisles felt like an empty stage. One night, while restocking batteries near the electronics section, she heard the faint static of the intercom switch on by itself. A voice came through, not the manager, not any of her coworkers. It was soft, almost whispering her name, drawn out in a tone that felt too intimate to be human. She froze, looking toward the ceiling speakers. When the voice faded, the air conditioner shut down all at once, plunging the building into a silence so absolute she could hear her heartbeat. She reported it the next morning. Management dismissed it as interference, maybe a crossed frequency from a nearby store. But when they reviewed the intercom logs, there had been no activation that night. The switch had remained off. Soon after, customers began complaining about strange reflections in the store mirrors. Some said they could see figures standing behind them that vanished when they turned around. Others claimed the reflections moved slower than they did, lagging by half a second. Security footage from those aisles showed nothing unusual, until one frame near 2 a.m., when the reflection of a woman lingered in the glass, even though no one was standing there. Her face was pale, blurred, and her eyes were open too wide. By the third week, employees started hearing footsteps behind them. Always the same pattern, 2 slow steps, then a pause. Sometimes the footsteps stopped only when they turned around, but the faint squeak of shoes against the polished floor continued just beyond the next aisle. One of the night managers tried to catch whoever it was, thinking it a prank. He followed the sound toward the storage room, flashlight in hand. As he opened the door, the beam landed on a row of mannequins waiting to be displayed for the clothing section. Every single one faced him, though they had been turned toward the wall earlier that evening. He laughed at first, nervously, thinking someone had rearranged them. Then he noticed the faint drag marks on the floor, the kind that looked like heavy objects being pulled. The following night, 2 employees called in sick. They claimed they could not shake off a feeling that something was watching them, even from home. Another worker said she found small child-sized handprints on her car window when she left the store after midnight. They were smudged in dust but pressed too firmly to be a trick of light. The turning point came when the night cleaner, Victor, went missing. His disappearance was not sudden. It happened gradually in pieces. Co-workers said he began to act distracted, pausing mid-conversation as if listening to something distant. He mentioned dreams where the aisles stretched endlessly, where voices whispered prices that were not for products but for people. On the night he vanished, he clocked in as usual. At 1:47 a.m., cameras caught him mopping near aisle 5. At 1:49, the footage distorted, waves of static rippling across the screen. When the image cleared, the mop lay on the ground and Victor was gone. The police searched every inch of the building. No signs of forced entry, no back door left ajar. His belongings remained untouched in the break room, and his car was still parked outside. The footage from that night became the center of attention, played over and over again by investigators. Some said that if you slowed it down just before the static hit, you could see a shadow stretching toward him from the end of the aisle, a shape that did not belong to any human form. The following nights brought escalation. The store's power system began to fail in isolated sections. Lights flickered in specific aisles, the frozen foods, electronics, and toys. Employees started to notice that the temperature in those areas dropped drastically, enough for breath to mist in the air. When maintenance teams came to check, all systems were normal. The reading showed no change in temperature. A customer recorded a short video on her phone, claiming she heard crying near the back of the store after closing. The video showed a dim aisle, lit only by emergency lights. The sound captured was faint but unmistakable, a woman sobbing softly somewhere out of sight. Then a whisper, too low to understand, followed by a metallic clatter. When she turned the camera toward the sound, the footage cut off. Her phone shut down completely and refused to turn back on until the next day. Within a month, half the night crew had quit. The few who remained refused to work alone. They moved in pairs, speaking in low voices, their eyes darting toward security mirrors. One described hearing music in the toy section, a carousel tune playing faintly even though there were no toys that made that sound. Another swore he saw a figure standing in the frozen aisle reflection, watching him with an expression that was not human. Rumors spread faster than management could contain them. Some said Victor had not disappeared but was still in the store, trapped in some way no one could explain. Others claimed he had become part of the building itself, his presence woven into its circuitry and lights. Employees started saying that if you whispered his name into the intercom mic after 2 a.m., you would hear the faint static of his voice answering back. One evening, a new worker tried it as a joke. He leaned toward the mic, pressed the button, and said Victor's name. For 3 seconds there was silence. Then came a distorted whisper, "Still here." The mic clicked off. The employee quit the next day. It began with the simplest things: lights flickering at the edges of the camera's vision, soft noises that the human mind could easily dismiss as mechanical hums. Yet those who worked the graveyard shift at the Walmart started noticing that the disturbances followed a rhythm, as if something unseen moved with purpose. The automatic doors would slide open at 2 a.m. precisely, even when the parking lot was empty. The air would change, heavier, colder, carrying the faint smell of damp wood and smoke. Some said it reminded them of burnt pine, the scent that used to drift from the old depot after it. Burned down decades ago, the first to truly sense something wrong was a cashier named Lena. She often volunteered for the late shifts because she liked the quiet, the way the aisles felt like an empty stage. One night, while restocking batteries near the electronics section, she heard the faint static of the intercom switch on by itself. A voice came through, not the manager, not any of her co-workers. It was soft, almost whispering her name, drawn out in a tone that felt too intimate to be human. She froze, looking toward the ceiling speakers. When the voice faded, the air conditioners shut down all at once, plunging the building into a silence so absolute she could hear her heartbeat. She reported it the next morning. Management dismissed it as interference, maybe a crossed frequency from a nearby store. But when they reviewed the intercom logs, there had been no activation that night. The switch had remained off. Soon after, customers began complaining about strange reflections in the store mirrors. Some said they could see figures standing behind them that vanished when they turned around. Others claimed the reflections moved slower than they did, lagging by half a second. Security footage from those aisles showed nothing unusual, until one frame near 2 a.m., when the reflection of a woman lingered in the glass, even though no one was standing there. Her face was pale, blurred, and her eyes were open too wide. By the third week, employees started hearing footsteps behind them. Always the same pattern, 2 slow steps, then a pause. Sometimes the footsteps stopped only when they turned around, but the faint squeak of shoes against the polished floor continued just beyond the next aisle. One of the night managers tried to catch whoever it was, thinking it a prank. He followed the sound toward the storage room, flashlight in hand. As he opened the door, the beam landed on a row of mannequins waiting to be displayed for the clothing section. Every single one faced him, though they had been turned toward the wall earlier that evening. He laughed at first, nervously, thinking someone had rearranged them. Then he noticed the faint drag marks on the floor, the kind that looked like heavy objects being pulled. The following night, 2 employees called in sick. They claimed they could not shake off a feeling that something was watching them, even from home. Another worker said she found small child-sized handprints on her car window when she left the store after midnight. They were smudged in dust but pressed too firmly to be a trick of light. The turning point came when the night cleaner, Victor, went missing. His disappearance was not sudden. It happened gradually in pieces. Co-workers said he began to act distracted, pausing mid-conversation as if listening to something distant. He mentioned dreams where the aisle stretched endlessly, where voices whispered prices that were not for products but for people. On the night he vanished, he clocked in as usual. At 1:47 a.m., cameras caught him mopping near aisle 5. At 1:49, the footage distorted, waves of static rippling across the screen. When the image cleared, the mop lay on the ground and Victor was gone. The police searched every inch of the building. No signs of forced entry, no back door left ajar. His belongings remained untouched in the break room and his car was still parked outside. The footage from that night became the center of attention, played over and over again by investigators. Some said that if you slowed it down just before the static hit, you could see a shadow stretching toward him from the end of the aisle, a shape that did not belong to any human form. The following nights brought escalation. The store's power system began to fail in isolated sections. Lights flickered in specific aisles, the frozen foods, electronics, and toys. Employees started to notice that the temperature in those areas dropped drastically, enough for breath to mist in the air. When maintenance teams came to check, all systems were normal. The readings showed no change in temperature. A customer recorded a short video on her phone, claiming she heard crying near the back of the store after closing. The video showed a dim aisle lit only by emergency lights. The sound captured was faint but unmistakable. A woman sobbing softly somewhere out of sight. Then a whisper too low to understand, followed by a metallic clatter. When she turned the camera toward the sound, the footage cut off. Her phone shut down completely and refused to turn back on until the next day. Within a month, half the night crew had quit. The few who remained refused to work alone. They moved in pairs, speaking in low voices, their eyes darting toward security mirrors. One described hearing music in the toy section, a carousel tune playing faintly even though there were no toys that made that sound. Another swore he saw a figure standing in the frozen aisle reflection, watching him with an expression that was not human. Rumors spread faster than management could contain them. Some said Victor had not disappeared but was still in the store, trapped in some way no one could explain. Others claimed he had become part of the building itself, his presence woven into its circuitry and lights. Employees started saying that if you whispered his name into the intercom mic after 2 a.m., you would hear the faint static of his voice answering back. One evening, a new worker tried it as a joke. He leaned toward the mic, pressed the button, and said Victor's name. For 3 seconds there was silence. Then came a distorted whisper, "Still here." The mic clicked off. The employee quit the next day. From that point, the Walmart was never the same. Customers entered and left as usual, but a sense of quiet dread settled over the building. The aisles felt colder, the lights dimmer, the space between shelves narrower. It was as if the store itself was shrinking, breathing in slowly, drawing everything closer to its hollow center. And through it all, the intercom still hummed faintly with static, like a pulse beneath the surface, waiting for someone else to listen. The investigation began with order and reason. Paperwork, statements and footage carefully cataloged by police officers who believed every mystery had a practical explanation. But as they dug deeper, the evidence began to shift under their hands, bending logic like heat over metal. What started as a case of disappearance became a slow descent into contradictions that refused to align. The first clue that something was wrong lay in the surveillance footage. Dozens of cameras covered the store from every angle, recording 24 hours a day. Yet, for reasons no technician could explain, the moment Victor vanished was accompanied by a 4-second blackout on every camera simultaneously. Not a total loss of signal, just static, moving like ripples across a pond before returning to normal. The store's power grid showed no fluctuation. Every device outside that exact timestamp worked flawlessly. Experts from the corporate security division reviewed the data and found something even stranger. When they isolated the audio from the static, faint whispers emerged. Layers of human voices overlapping, low and rhythmic, almost like chanting. The voices repeated certain syllables that no one could recognize, though one sound seemed clear enough to be unsettling. The name Victor. A technician, pale-faced, described it later as like hearing people breathe inside the wires. The company ordered all audio files deleted, but copies surfaced among the night workers, passed quietly through flash drives. Those who listened claimed that if you played the recording at half speed, you could hear one final sentence, something that sounded like, "We never left." The next clue came from the building itself. Maintenance crews performing routine checks on the plumbing and wiring reported hearing voices through the ventilation ducts. One electrician quit after claiming that when he shone a light through the vent, he saw movement on the other side, something crawling upward, dragging what looked like fingers across the metal. He insisted it was not an animal. The more investigators tried to restore order, the deeper the chaos spread. A detective who reviewed the missing person report discovered inconsistencies in the employee roster. Victor's name appeared twice in the payroll system, once for his actual shift, and once more for an older file with the same name, birth date, and address, listed as terminated in 2003. But the Walmart had not even existed then. When corporate HR tried to delete the duplicate record, the system crashed, restoring itself minutes later with both entries intact. There were also physical clues that made no sense. The janitor's cart remained exactly where he had left it, in the center of aisle 5. On closer inspection, the metal frame was coated with a thin film of ash. Not dust, not residue, but ash that tested positive for organic material. The floor beneath it had faint scorch marks, circular and precise, as if something had burned in perfect silence. No smoke alarms triggered. A forensic specialist suggested a short electrical surge, though no wires ran beneath that part of the floor. When they examined the cart's mop handle, they found it warped near the base as though it had been exposed to intense heat. Yet the surrounding area was untouched. The specialist never returned for the follow-up examination. Then came the customer testimonies. Dozens of statements poured in, filled with odd consistencies that could not be ignored. People described hearing the faint hum of the intercom at strange hours, followed by distorted breathing. Some said the automatic doors opened for them before they reached the sensors, while others felt pressure on their shoulders, as if someone stood behind them. One man, a delivery driver, provided footage from his dash camera showing something peculiar. At 2:13 a.m., as he drove past the front of the store, the camera captured a figure standing inside near the doors. The image was blurry but distinct, a silhouette of a man wearing a Walmart vest. His posture was stiff, and his face turned directly toward the camera. When investigators compared it to Victor's employee photo, the resemblance was undeniable. But the man's eyes in the footage reflected light like an animal's, bright white against the darkness. The driver said he turned around immediately, but when he returned, the entrance was empty. Only the sliding doors opened once, slowly, as if exhaling. After that, rumors spread beyond the town. Paranormal investigators arrived, amateurs and professionals alike, drawn to the whispers surrounding the midnight Walmart. Some brought specialized equipment, recording EVPs, thermal scans, and electromagnetic readings. They all came away with different data, yet every report contained the same observation: temperature drops in aisle 5, electronic interference, and a constant background hum, just on the edge of human hearing. One investigator claimed to capture an image through an infrared camera, a faint, human-like figure standing behind a row of freezers. When he tried to print the image, the machine produced a blank sheet, except for one small smudge of black near the bottom corner. It looked like the outline of a hand pressed against the paper from inside. A local historian, curious about the growing attention, searched through archives to trace the land's history. What he found deepened the unease. Before the railway depot, the area had been a holding ground during a 19th-century cholera outbreak. Temporary shelters were built there, and hundreds who fell ill were quarantined until they died. Their burial sites were unmarked, the graves shallow. Records stopped after a flood swept through the region, erasing physical traces. When Walmart's foundation was poured, the blueprint showed an irregularity in the soil composition under the grocery section, the same place where most disturbances occurred. Instead of compact earth, workers found layers of decayed wood, bone fragments, and dark tar-like residue. Construction schedules were tight, so they paved over it without reporting the anomaly. Now, when people walked those aisles late at night, the floor sometimes creaked faintly beneath their feet, as though hollow spaces lingered below. A retired police officer, one of the first responders from the disappearance case, spoke anonymously years later. He described walking through the store during the search and finding a trail of footprints, bare feet, wet, leading from aisle 5 to the storage room. The strange part, he said, was that the prints were smaller with each step until they stopped entirely mid-stride. He never filed that detail in his report. He said no one would have believed him. In time, Walmart replaced the entire floor with new tiles, painted the walls, and installed brighter lights. The incidents lessened but never stopped completely. Employees still whispered about static voices and figures glimpsed in their periphery. The company issued a statement calling it local folklore, but those who had seen the evidence knew better. The store had become a vessel, an echo chamber of everything buried beneath it. The cameras, the lights, the intercom, they did not just record or illuminate anymore. They remembered, and every night at 2:13 a.m. the lights still flickered in aisle 5. Always the same pattern, always the same time. By the time autumn rolled over the small town, the people who still worked the night shift at the Walmart had stopped speaking about what they saw. It was not fear of disbelief anymore, it was exhaustion. They were too tired to keep explaining things that could not be explained. Every night the lights burned bright and white, humming endlessly, but the air inside the building grew heavier with something that felt alive. The new hires came and went in a matter of weeks. Some left without collecting their final paychecks, saying nothing, just walking out mid-shift. Those who stayed began to change. Their movements slowed, their voices softened, and they avoided the mirrors that lined the security corners. The assistant manager, a woman named Carol, noticed that they all developed the same habit, glancing over their shoulders whenever someone spoke their name. There was an unspoken rule among the staff now: do not linger in aisle 5. It was supposed to be a normal part of the grocery section, rows of detergent, cleaning fluids, and bleach, but it never felt right. The temperature dropped there. The air smelled faintly metallic, and sometimes the faint sound of running water came from nowhere. Employees who were sent to restock there returned pale, trembling, or sick to their stomachs. The human mind can tolerate strangeness for only so long before it begins to break. For the workers, the boundary between reality and imagination thinned with every passing night. Some started taking photographs to prove to themselves that what they saw was real. Yet when they reviewed the pictures, the aisles appeared empty. Too empty. Like the lens had captured something scrubbed clean of life. One night, a young worker named David left the store after his shift and refused to drive home. He sat in his car in the parking lot until sunrise, hands shaking on the steering wheel. When asked what happened, he only said, "It whispered my name from the speakers. It knew what I was thinking." He never returned. Customers began to sense it too. Parents noticed that their children became quiet inside the store, clinging tightly to their hands. One little girl told her mother she saw a man crawling under the shelves, even though the space beneath them was far too small. A teenage boy who came to buy snacks late one night returned home crying. His mother said he would not speak about it, but she found his receipt later. The timestamp was 2:13 a.m., the same moment the cameras always flickered. The community around the Walmart started to feel the strain as well. Families who lived near the store reported sleepless nights, filled with dreams of narrow aisles and buzzing lights. The sound of shopping carts rolling on their own was heard at odd hours, echoing faintly through the empty streets. A strange static began to interfere with nearby radios and televisions, pulsing like a heartbeat. Some residents disconnected their devices entirely, saying the interference carried voices when listened to closely. It became clear that the effect of the store had spread beyond its walls. It was no longer just a location, it was an infection. The people who worked there described feeling watched even in their own homes. Their reflections lagged in mirrors. Their phones flickered when they tried to record the static. One woman said her son began drawing the Walmart logo over and over in his notebook, surrounding it with black lines that resembled roots. When she asked why, he replied, "Because it is growing." A local therapist began treating several employees suffering from the same symptoms: nightmares, paranoia, and hallucinations of aisles that did not exist. They all described the same dream: walking through the store after closing, hearing the intercom call their names, and finding their own faces staring back at them through the security mirrors. Some woke up screaming, claiming they could still hear the hum of fluorescent lights. One night, Carol, the assistant manager, stayed after hours to review footage from the previous week. She had begun documenting everything, keeping a private log of strange events. The footage showed the usual still aisles, the gleaming floors, the endless rows of shelves. Then, near 2:13 a.m., the frame trembled. Something dark moved between the aisles, too fast for the camera to focus. It appeared human, but its proportions were wrong. Arms too long, head tilted too far back, walking with an unnatural rhythm. Carol paused the footage, zooming in. For a moment, she thought she saw the Walmart logo reflected in its eyes. The next morning, her notebook was found open on her desk, the pages filled with frantic handwriting. The last entry read, "It knows we are watching." Carol stopped showing up to work after that. Her house remained locked for days before neighbors noticed she was gone. Inside, the television played the Walmart security feed on a loop. The remaining employees began to fall apart. Conversations turned short and disjointed. Some started leaving notes to themselves, reminders that they were still real, still human, still separate from the store. But even that certainty began to crumble. A few described moments where the aisles seemed to stretch farther than before, like the space itself was expanding. Others claimed the walls breathed, pushing out a low hum that vibrated in their chests. Psychologists might have called it mass hysteria, a shared delusion fueled by stress, but those who lived through it knew better. They could feel it pressing against them, observing through the cameras and mirrors, whispering softly through the intercom when no one else was around. It was patient, as if feeding on fear. By winter, the store felt almost abandoned even when customers filled it. The energy was wrong, hollow, echoing. Employees avoided eye contact and the intercom remained off, though faint static could still be heard in the ceiling vents. People stopped asking questions about Victor. It was as if he had never existed, though every once in a while someone swore they saw a figure mopping near aisle 5, moving in slow, deliberate motions. When they blinked, he was gone. The silence became the worst part of it. It was not the screams or the whispers, it was the waiting. The feeling that something inside the store was listening for the right moment to speak again. And when it finally did, it would not be through the intercom or the lights. It would be through the people who stayed too long, who ignored the warning signs, who thought they could work the night shift and walk away unchanged. But no one walks away unchanged, not from a place that remembers you. When the stories reached beyond the town, the Walmart was no longer just a store. It was an open wound on the map, attracting investigators, journalists, and self-proclaimed experts who wanted to explain what had happened there. Each came with confidence, armed with cameras, measuring devices, and theories that promised to uncover the truth. None left unchanged. The first official reinvestigation was led by the state police after another report surfaced, this time of a night shift employee who collapsed during work, whispering about faces behind the lights. When the investigators arrived, they found nothing obviously criminal. Yet one officer wrote later in his report that the store felt wrong in a way that does not show up on paper. He described a smell of burned dust, a low static hum in his earpiece, and shadows that appeared to move slightly even when he stood still. His body camera footage glitched repeatedly near aisle 5. The timestamp jumped ahead by 4 minutes every time. That footage, quietly leaked months later, became the subject of online obsession. Conspiracy channels slowed it frame by frame, pointing out faint shapes between the shelves. Some said they were faces, others said they were just compression artifacts. Yet the voices on the audio were undeniable. Faint, overlapping whispers repeating a single word: stay. The corporate spokesperson dismissed it all as tampering. There is no evidence of wrongdoing, he told reporters, smiling too tightly for the cameras. We are cooperating fully with local authorities. But behind that calm veneer, internal emails told a different story. Employees who requested transfers were denied. Requests for counseling were ignored. Maintenance teams replaced equipment in the store every 3 months, yet electrical failures persisted. One technician wrote in his notes, "The wiring seems to be growing." Then came the investigators from the paranormal research group, 3 men and a woman who called themselves the Midnight Archive. They spent 2 nights inside the Walmart with permission from management, promising to disprove the rumors once and for all. Their live stream drew hundreds of viewers, but the feed cut abruptly at 2:13 a.m. The screen filled with static, and a faint reflection appeared in the camera lens, someone standing just behind the cameraman, pale and smiling. When the stream resumed 20 minutes later, the team was gone. Their van was found the next morning in the parking lot, engine still running, headlights dimmed. Inside were their recording devices, all wiped clean except for one audio file. It contained heavy breathing and a whisper so close to the microphone that it distorted. "Do not bring light here." That was the last time anyone entered the store for an investigation. Corporate sealed the building for repairs, claiming it would reopen after a full renovation. It never did. Still, theories multiplied like weeds. Some said the store was built over old burial grounds from the cholera outbreak, that restless souls rose beneath the foundation seeking recognition. Others believed something older than human tragedy lurked there, a presence bound to the land itself, awakened when the depot burned and hungry for remembrance. A few took a darker view. That Walmart, with its endless lights and mirrors, had become a machine of its own, a structure too large, too artificial, that developed awareness through the millions of reflections and whispers it absorbed each night. They said it learned the way humans do, through repetition, through imitation. The more people who entered, the more it grew aware of what they were and what they feared. A psychologist from a nearby university proposed a rational theory: collective psychosis. According to her, constant exposure to fluorescent light and low-frequency vibrations could cause paranoia, hallucinations, and shared delusion among workers. But when she visited the site for her own study, she reported losing 3 hours of memory. Her digital watch displayed the wrong date for the rest of her life. She refused to discuss it afterward. Another expert, a former electrical engineer, suggested that the wiring of the store acted like a neural network, processing noise from thousands of devices at once. He believed the magnetic fields generated in such a confined space could interfere with the human brain, inducing a sense of presence or dread. Yet even he admitted that the data collected from Walmart's power grid was unlike anything he had ever seen. "It behaves like something alive," he said in a recorded interview. "The fluctuations anticipate our measurements before we make them." Online forums became flooded with amateur theories, portal experiments, government cover-ups, time slips, curses, and artificial intelligence gone wrong. Yet one thread resurfaced repeatedly: the connection between Victor's disappearance and the recurring time of 2:13 a.m. Some users claimed to have decoded patterns in the flickering lights. Others said they could hear words if they slowed recordings from the intercom hum. One phrase emerged across multiple recordings, "Still open." Eventually, the local authorities stopped responding to reports. They claimed the store was under indefinite renovation, though no construction permits were ever filed. The building stood silent for years, its parking lot overgrown with weeds, its windows covered in dust. Yet every few weeks, lights could still be seen glowing faintly through the grime. Pale, rhythmic, as if breathing. One winter night, a trucker passing the highway reported seeing figures standing near the doors, 5 of them dressed in Walmart vests, motionless. Their reflection shimmered on the wet pavement before vanishing into darkness. The trucker assumed it was a trick of exhaustion until he saw the same thing again a week later, from a different angle. This time there were 6. Theories continued to evolve, feeding off one another. Some said the store acted as a vessel, a container for energy too strong to fade. Others believed it was expanding invisibly through electrical grids and networks, spreading the same hum to other locations. Reports began surfacing from distant towns, lights flickering in other 24-hour stores, voices echoing faintly through intercoms at night. If the store was indeed aware, perhaps closing its doors only taught it how to move. Whatever the explanation, one fact remained consistent across every theory, every account, every recording: the time. Always 2:13 a.m. Always the same breath of static before silence. And those who still lived near the town said that on some nights, when the sky was especially still, you could hear it faintly from the highway. The hum of refrigeration units, the soft squeak of a shopping cart wheel, and a voice speaking through dead air, not loud, not clear, but steady, repeating something no one ever fully understood, a warning maybe, or an invitation. Years have passed, and yet that empty Walmart still stands on the edge of town like a monument to something the living refuse to name. The once bright sign has faded, its letters dim and fractured, flickering weakly against the night sky. The parking lot has cracked open with weeds and wild grass pushing through, yet somehow the asphalt still holds a faint warmth long after the sun has gone down, as if the ground beneath remembers the lights that never truly went out. Local authorities stopped mentioning the building years ago. The property records remain, but the ownership trail loops into itself. Corporate names that lead to empty shell companies, phone numbers that ring endlessly into silence. Occasionally, curious explorers or thrill seekers make their way to the site. They go for the thrill, for the ghost stories whispered on forums and podcasts. But the ones who go inside never stay long. They emerge pale, trembling, unable to explain what they felt. The few who spoke about it described the same thing: the air thick with static, the lights flickering in steady rhythm, and the unmistakable hum of something vast and electric breathing beneath the walls. One of them, a former security guard from another Walmart branch, confessed that when he entered the abandoned store, he heard the intercom crackle above his head. It called his name, twice, slowly. His flashlight dimmed, flickered, then went out. The lights overhead turned on one by one, illuminating the aisles in a sequence that led him forward, deeper into the darkness. He did not run. He said he felt compelled to follow. When the light stopped, he stood before aisle 5. The shelves were empty, the floor spotless. And then, faintly, from somewhere inside the walls, he heard the sound of mopping. He left that night and never went back. Others claim the store is not truly abandoned, that sometimes if you drive by at the right hour, always near 2:13 a.m., you can see faint silhouettes moving between the aisles through the cracked glass doors. Not ghosts, not quite human, but something between the two, pacing endlessly as if waiting for customers that never come. Truckers passing along the highway say their radios fill with static when they near the lot, always tuned to the same frequency no matter what station they try. Some even report catching faint words, a voice mumbling, "Cleanup complete." A group of filmmakers once attempted a documentary about the phenomenon. They spent weeks interviewing locals, gathering the old stories, tracing the origins back to the Depot fire and the cholera fields before that. Their last footage shows them pulling up to the Walmart at night. One of them, a woman behind the camera, laughs nervously as she zooms in on the entrance. "Do you see that?" she says. The lens catches a brief flicker of movement, something pale moving past the glass just for a heartbeat. The frame shakes, the camera dips, and then the video cuts to black. Their van was found 3 days later, parked near the woods a few miles away, doors open, lights on, no sign of the crew. After that, the building was declared unsafe. The town council fenced it off, though no one knows who paid for it. Still, the lights inside sometimes glow faintly through the dust-covered windows, defying the cut power lines. Locals stopped walking their dogs anywhere near it. Even the birds seemed to avoid the area, flying in strange, wide arcs as if sensing something the rest of humanity has chosen to forget. But forgetting does not erase what happened. It only buries it deeper. The people who once worked there still dream of the aisles. They wake in the night certain they can hear shopping carts moving just outside their homes. One woman swears she sees the reflection of fluorescent lights on her ceiling when she closes her eyes. Another keeps hearing the phrase, "Price check complete," whispered through her television when the volume is low. She has unplugged it, but the sound remains. It is easy to dismiss these things as superstition, as the remnants of fear echoing through the human mind. But the question that lingers, the one no one can answer, is this: what happens to a place that never truly closes? What happens when the hum of electricity and the repetition of routine create something that begins to remember us? The Walmart was not haunted in the traditional sense. It was something more patient, more intelligent, something that learned through mimicry. It had heard laughter, music, conversation, and grief, all trapped beneath its ceiling of endless light. It absorbed them, perhaps even understood them. And when those voices left, it continued to replay them over and over again, until they became part of its fabric. Perhaps that is why the intercom still hums faintly at night. Perhaps that is why people still hear names whispered through static. The store was built for consumption of products, of time, of people's attention. Somewhere along the way, it began consuming something else, entirely. Memory. Presence. The residue of human life that clings to every place we linger too long. It is said that if you stand outside the building on a still night and listen closely, you can hear the low rhythm of machines deep beneath the floor, still running after all these years. Some say it sounds like refrigeration units. Others say it sounds like breathing. And if you stay too long, the hum seems to sync with your pulse until you cannot tell which one is yours. Every town has a place like that. Some quiet corner of the world where the air feels too heavy and the silence lasts too long. Most never realize that those places are not waiting for the living to return. They are simply remembering. And maybe that is all this story ever was. Not a haunting, but a form of memory that refuses to die. A loop that plays over and over, waiting for someone new to step inside to complete the pattern, to become part of it. The Walmart stands silent now, but silence does not always mean peace. Some say the last sound that can still be heard from inside comes from the intercom, faint and mechanical, repeating a message long after it should have stopped. Clean up. In aisle 5, then a pause, then breathing, and if you listen closely enough, too closely, you might hear it add one final word, again.